Mark Yu is a 7-year-old like no other. While his friends are putting on their pajamas to get ready for bed, Mark gets dressed for a classical concert. But not to watch. He's come to play.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are holding 5 minutes for the house. 5 minutes for the house, scheduled for an 8:05 start.
Mark can play more than 40 classical pieces from memory.
I like especially difficult ones and the ones that my teacher says no. My teacher says no because there are too many octaves.
What is it that makes gifted children so special? Do they just work harder than others? Or are they born with brilliant brains? It's a tense day for Mark and his mother, Chloe.
Go, use the bathroom first. Otherwise, you lose your concentration. Ow!
They are going to the LA Philharmonic for an audition.
Okay, and after the Hinestera, you can tell him that you have played with 5 different professional orchestras in the past year. Are you listening, Mark? Are you listening?
Mark has been invited to play for Vasily Sanaisky, a world-famous conductor.
And also you can play him with Chopin Nocturne. Don't ask him, okay? If you ask him, he might say, go home. Are you listening?
Maestro Sanaisky has seen talents come and go. Getting this man's ear for 10 minutes is a rare privilege for anyone, let alone a little boy.
I think that we've always been fascinated with kids who do things at the wrong age. And this is what gifted kids do. They do things at the wrong age. They're not supposed to be doing things so advanced. So they shock us, they surprise us. They seem like little adults in child bodies. And we want to figure out how it's possible.
Ellen Winner has spent the last 15 years studying gifted children. Today she's come to visit Mark.
That's great. Your fingers are very nimble. What do you want to be when you grow up?
Isn't that obvious? I want to be a psychiatrist. No, just joking. A musician.
So I want to know how your mom first discovered that you were so musical.
There was one day when I went to a party and I heard the melody of Mary Had a Little Lamb, and I played the tune on the piano.
Really?
Yeah.
How old were you?
2.
While they were singing, he jumped on it and played the whole Mary Had a Little Lamb. And I've never taught him how to play the piano.
And did he get it completely right?
Oh, yeah.
You're a tease.
Stories like Mark seem to defy logic, but science is beginning to shed light on the enigma of God-given talent. Gottfried Schlaug started playing when he was 7 years old. He could have had a career in music, but decided to become a neuroscientist instead. Gottfried has scanned the brains of dozens of professional musicians to work out how they produce the brain power that music demands.
There's hardly any other skill, any other activity that would involve this much brain real estate. The right question to ask would be, which parts of the brain are not active while you're playing a musical instrument?
Music is serious multitasking. Musicians read the notes, feel the keys, move their fingers, and listen to what they're playing all at the same time. Gottfried found that musicians' brains look like they're built for this job. Several areas are bigger than normal. One of them is the cerebellum. It takes up only 10% of brain volume, but there are more nerve cells crammed into this small space than there are in the rest of the entire brain. This tiny organ works harder and faster than any other part of the brain, as it orchestrates the movements of thousands of muscle fibers in the body. A skilled pianist can play up to 30 notes per second with exquisite timing, so a bigger cerebellum may well be better. Another area that is bigger in musicians is the corpus callosum, a strip of tissue connecting the two hemispheres. It's a mission-critical organ in a piano player who needs to precisely synchronize the movements of the left and the right-hand sides of the body. Each side is managed by one half of the brain, so the two hemispheres have to work in harmony. A bigger corpus callosum contains more nerve fibers, so more signals could travel from one side to the other and speed up communication. But why are musicians' brains different? Are they born or made? Gottfried has teamed up with Ellen Winner to investigate whether the brain shapes music or music shapes the brain.
People have looked at adults with talent and shown that their brains are different, which does not get at the question. So actually, our study will be the first study to test the question of whether we can find the brain basis of talent prior to training.
Ellen and Gottfried have been tracking 50 children from the moment they started learning a musical instrument.
Right on these smiley faces and make them all match. Okay, ready? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go!
Every year they put the kids through their paces. They test their dexterity and intelligence.
Red, red again. Good job.
And then they scan their brains. After only 1 year of playing, Ellen and Gottfried can see that the kids' brains are starting to change. The areas responsible for hearing and analyzing music are more active than those of children who don't play an instrument. To Gottfried, this is no surprise.
The brain has a remarkable ability to adapt, and everybody with born into the right environment, with the right nurturing, could potentially grow up to be an excellent musician.
But Ellen Winner thinks that practice alone is not the whole story.
I would bet anything that the most gifted children, the ones with the most potential in music, start out with brains that look structurally different.
Ellen and Gottfried are tackling a question that has baffled scientists for a very long time, and it's still a bone of contention. Is it nature or nurture that makes a genius? In 1970, in a quiet suburb of Los Angeles, a harrowing story came to light. It would change forever our understanding of how a child's brain develops. A social worker discovered a 13-year-old girl who was still in diapers and whimpered like an animal.
Clearly something was terribly wrong. She didn't speak. She was completely unkempt. She could hardly walk. She could hardly balance.
Jeannie, as the child was named, had suffered a most horrific ordeal.
We learned after she was found from interviews with her mother, from some drawings that Jeannie made, that she had been kept isolated in a room at the back of a house. In this room there was a potty seat to which she had been harnessed without any clothes, just naked, and left to sit there day and night. She was in this room for 12 and a half years.
Jeannie's father was mentally unstable. He had decided to hide his daughter from the world.
Mr. Wiley?
Yes.
Why did you keep your daughter in a room?
Mr. Wiley has no comment.
No comment.
We haven't had time to discuss the charge. We haven't even seen them.
Jeannie's parents were both charged with willful abuse. 15 minutes before he was due in court, her father put a gun to his head. But the damage to Jeannie was done. She had spent her childhood in almost total isolation. Her brain had been deprived of a nurturing environment and left to grow in solitude. The effect was devastating. Jeannie had the mental age of an 18-month-old infant, unable to talk. But to science, she offered a unique opportunity, a chance to separate the effects of nature and nurture on a child's brain. The big question was, would Jeannie be able to catch up? Susie Curtis was a young linguist when she got the job of looking after Jeannie 5 days a week.
Food is for. She was hard to be with. She did not know how to swallow very well, so she would salivate and just spit. So I would come home drenched in her saliva. There were lots of things that were very, very difficult and unpleasant, but nonetheless, she was just entirely captivating. The way she moved her hands, the way she just moved her body and her face, her eyes, that just seemed to be incredibly expressive and hold the world within them.
Susie soon discovered that Jeannie was highly intelligent and extremely curious about the world.
I was really hopeful because she was just insatiable. She wanted to know the word for everything. And her assumption was that everything had its own label. Every shade of color had its own label. And so she wanted to learn the label for everything in her world.
It's dark, yes.
She continued to develop a huge vocabulary. I could no longer keep track of what she knew. And she continued to be able to string words together. Buy applesauce store, or buy more applesauce store, which meant buy more applesauce at the store.
Oh, Mama.
Let me see. The log?
Oh, Mama.
But the little bits and pieces of English that take those words and transform them into a grammatical sense never came in. All the question words like who, what, where, why, when, never. She never had any of them. Pronouns like he, she, it, they, him, her, not in her vocabulary.
Here, you do it. Put them in the box.
And so despite all the years that I was with her, where I saw lots of growth in lots of other areas, she didn't ever learn the grammar of English.
Jeannie never worked out the fundamental rules of language. Her brain had missed a critical stage of its development. In the first years of life, the main job of the brain is to make sure all the brain cells are wired up correctly. Surprisingly, it's not just a matter of making connections, but cutting them. A 3-year-old has twice as many connections between brain cells as a grown-up, and they're jumbled and chaotic. To work properly, the brain must decide which connections to keep and which ones to cut. Trillions of connections need to be checked. So the brain uses a brutal but effective rule. Use it or lose it. Because Jeannie's parents hardly ever spoke to her, the parts of her brain responsible for grammar were not stimulated and were crippled for life. Jeannie's story did not have a happy ending. She went through a string of foster homes, was abused in one of them, and stopped talking altogether. She now lives in a care home in California. Jeannie's experience was extreme, but her case taught science that once a critical window of brain development has passed, there is no going back. A growing brain is both vulnerable and extremely malleable.
You do it like that, okay, until it's really pointy. And see my wrist?
Mark's mother exploited this quality to teach him one of the most complex languages in the world.
Yan, that means a person with two legs. There. Mark's first 3 years, I spoke to him in Cantonese exclusively. He did not learn how to speak English or another language until he started school when he was 3 years old. And now I'm teaching him little by little Mandarin. That's why I made a right decision to teach him Cantonese in the very beginning. It's the hardest language to pick up later on in life.
Stimulation is essential for a growing brain. By the time a baby is born, it has already done 12 weeks worth of listening. Very often a child's first memory is a melody. When Mark's mother, Chloe, was a little girl, she really wanted to play the piano, but her parents followed Chinese tradition and lavished all the musical education on her elder brother. So when Chloe was having Mark, she immersed him in a world of music to give him what she herself was denied.
During my pregnancy, I would play the same piece over and over again, hoping that by the time when he was born, he could hum me a Fifth Symphony by Beethoven. I'm just kidding. But yeah, it actually happened when about the time when he started talking, he was humming the same symphonies that I've been playing to him since I was pregnant.
Chloe certainly didn't waste any time with Mark's education. But is there actually any point in starting this early? In the late 1960s, America was a divided country, seething with tension. In the long hot summer of '67, the ghettos of several major cities erupted into violence. Many African Americans felt excluded from society, denied access to the American dream. Politicians tried to stem the tide by pouring money into schooling and social programs, but it didn't work. Disadvantaged children were still being left behind. A group of psychologists in North Carolina had an idea that they hoped might solve the problem.
Oh, this is a young lady who is a teacher now. She's a teacher in Charlotte.
Joe Sparling and his team wanted to reach children far younger than had ever been done before.
We had a great optimism in the early 70s that we could really make a difference in kids' lives, and that early education was maybe the way to do that.
The team went out into deprived neighborhoods and handpicked 111 newborn babies for a unique experiment. They called it the Abecedarian Project. Kay Gattis was a teenager living in poverty when she got pregnant.
I was 16 years old having a child. Didn't know anything about having a child. Yeah, I got a baby picture of him somewhere in here. Here you go. That's him.
Without intervention, Kay's son Miche would have been well behind his more privileged peers by the time he started school.
Once you are behind in school, and once you begin to be labeled as someone who is slow or someone who can't quite do it, people begin to treat you differently, and they lower their expectations for you. And as that occurs, you see kids begin to have the light go out of their eyes.
Craig Ramey and his team believed they could break this vicious circle with science. Miche joined the project when he was 6 weeks old, and Joe Sparling would make sure that his brain was kept busy. The researchers had distilled the latest scientific theories on child development into 200 learning games.
You put one in, you put a blue ball in. Oh, you got it out. Look at this.
However simple, each game had a hidden agenda.
You don't like those all together? One of the important principles of teaching is follow the child's lead, because if the child is into something, that's something they're ready to learn. See mine? Can you get one like mine? It's not a matter of just throwing stuff at the kid. You got it. You basically say, what is this child likely to be comfortable doing right now? What has he got the capabilities for? And then you do something that stretches him just a little.
All right, looks good.
But it wasn't all fun and games for the children. The scientists needed to know whether anything was happening in their stimulated brains.
Okay, now you do it.
It's fair to say that these children have had more data collected about them than probably any other group of children on Earth.
The children took regular IQ tests, and their scores were compared to kids who had not received any special treatment.
We didn't see any differences at 3 months of age. We didn't see any differences at 6, none at 9, none at 12. At 15 months of age, the way that the children literally saw the world began to be different.
The stimulated children were learning faster, spoke more fluently, and had better IQ scores than their peers.
By 2 years of age, the differences between the two groups were dramatic. And by 3 years of age, we knew that we had to get to kids long before 3.
At the age of 5, the children were released into the school system. But wherever they went, they always came back to be tested. And that's when the real surprise hit. They had kept their IQ advantage, achieved higher qualifications, and gained better jobs. Solid proof that early stimulation did have a lasting effect on their lives.
We were over the moon. This was meaningful. IQs were never the objective, but they were a way to measure that something was happening. Something was going on in there, and that translates into school achievement, into later life achievement.
Miche Gattis is one of many success stories.
Very proud of him. I'm proud of all my kids, but he's like teaching me in my life now.
Miche got a college degree and now works in New York. Early intervention had not just boosted the IQ of the children, it had taught them the rules of the learning game.
Some of my friends, they call me smart boy, a nerdy boy, this, that, you know. Nah, I'm not, you know, I'm just like you. I just like to learn. Everything goes back to early learning, earlier education. It really does. I mean, I don't care what most people will say, you know, wait till you get into public school, what have you. No, it starts way earlier than that. And I think hadn't I had that, who knows where I would have been.
35 years after the study began, the results are crystal clear. For the brain, there is no such thing as too early. This is especially so with music, where starting early is the norm. But is an early start enough to make a genius? This is Mark's first public performance, at the age of 3. Within 1 year, Mark had moved on from Mary Had a Little Lamb.
Beethoven, right, Mom? Oh, no, it's by Mozart. No, it's by Beethoven.
How long did it take him to learn that?
Not too long. Not too long. That piece is only about 4 pages.
And he was 3 then?
Yeah, he was 3 then.
Wow.
Same with the cello.
Ellen Winner believes that gifted kids are born with something extra, something their upbringing cannot explain.
I don't think that most 3-year-olds would be able to do that, even if they were given the regimen of training that Mark had. That was not a typical child.
Could it be that Mark inherited his gift? Is there a gene for genius? Mark Yu has a rare gift. Perfect pitch.
F, E, D, C. I already know.
Perfect pitch is really a very well-developed memory. Some people have this ability to remember from very early ages with precision exactly what frequencies sound like. They know that 440 sounds like that. What blew me away was Chloe saying he's never studied it.
Major.
And this one?
Jeff Bernstein, a distinguished musician, is intrigued to know just how good Mark's ear really is. To Mark, identifying a musical note is as easy as naming a colour. Only 1 in 10,000 people have this gift.
4 notes.
Perfect pitch doesn't make you a musical genius, but it certainly helps. The talent in some musicians is so striking that to the casual observer it looks like they must have inherited this gift in their genes. So is there such a thing as a gene for genius? Robert Plomin from King's College London is trying to find the genes that fuel intelligence.
What we're basically doing is comparing identical and non-identical twins to ask how similar they are. So it's kind of a very simple, crude method for just asking, is genetics important?
Robert Plomin has signed up over 30,000 twins for his research. The children run through a battery of tests designed to probe their intelligence. Young twins brought up together experience the same environment, which allows Robert to take nurture out of the equation. He compares the test scores of identical twins, who are genetically the same, to the scores of non-identical twins, who are genetically distinct. Any difference in these twins' test scores must be down to what they're born with. But which are the genes that make the difference? Some twins have donated their DNA, so Robert can try to find out. A Herculean task.
Here's your genes.
There's 3 billion nucleotide bases of DNA, and there's maybe millions of DNA differences between us. Now, so that's been the problem.
Over the years, Robert has collected DNA samples from 10,000 twins. He now uses cutting-edge molecular biology to compare the DNA of twins with high test scores to the DNA of the less able twins. He hopes that this will help him pinpoint the genes that produce the IQ differences between children, and the more he looks, the more he finds.
Genetics works in very complicated ways. We're not talking about one gene that changes something simple and physical like neurotransmitters. What's clear is we're not dealing with 1 or 2 genes. We're probably dealing with hundreds of genes of very small effect.
Even hundreds of genes acting together do not produce a genius, but Robert thinks they can provide a child with a particular propensity that can then be nurtured.
So genetics only gives us these propensities to seek things out in the environment. So kids with genetic propensities, say to musical ability or reading or sports, they actually, as they make their way in the world, select and create and modify environments to kind of foster the development of their ability, so that little differences early can become bigger and bigger differences as kids grow up and make their way in the world.
To say that Mark Yu has a propensity for music is a massive understatement. His whole world revolves around it, from dawn to dusk, 7 days a week. He now practices up to 8 hours a day and says he loves every minute of it.
B flat major dominant.
What started as a propensity has now grown into an obsession.
I do not believe that you can take an ordinary child and turn that child into a prodigy. Why don't I believe it? Well, I'll give you two reasons. First of all, you can't force an ordinary child to practice 6 hours a day. They simply won't, and they can't. They'll fall apart. And second of all, there are too many reports of children at a very young age doing astonishing things before they've had any training. I studied a child at 2 years of age. He asked his mother to read him a particular book. And he asked her to read him that book out loud, pointing to the words as she read. And he watched. And he asked her to repeat this every day for a week. Then he brought her a second book and asked her to repeat this for a second week. At the end of 2 weeks, he knew how to read. He never wanted to be read to again. He had cracked the code of reading.
Gifted children are not just born with aptitude, but an iron will to succeed. Mark has just bullied his mum into letting him ride without stabilizers for the first time in his life.
If I let go, you fall. Just do it quickly.
He has never done it before. What's the trick?
Just to grab him back here. You run.
Oh, I see. Don't let go.
Chloe is understandably anxious, but Mark doesn't want her help. He wants to crack this on his own.
Go fast!
Thank you. That's just how I learned it.
Really gifted kids drive themselves. I call it a rage to master. Some people don't like the word rage because it reminds them of anger, but I like the word because it really captures the intensity. Sometimes the parents are running along after these kids trying to catch up, trying to keep up. So I think one of the signs of a truly gifted child is a child who has this rage to master, a child who wants to play the piano, for example, who wants to practice voluntarily. Most kids do not want to practice voluntarily. A kid who you cannot drag away.
When he falls in love with a certain piece of music, he would sleep and eat and basically live with the music. He would always have this melody ringing in his mind. He said, "Mom, I can't go to bed." Even when after he fell asleep, he woke up in the middle of the night and said, "Mom, can I go down and practice a little bit on that?"
I wanted to sneak out of the room and practice it silently, but my mom's constantly sneaking out.
Do you like easy pieces or difficult pieces?
Especially difficult ones, and the ones that my teacher says no.
Gifted kids think and learn differently. When they do the thing they love, they enter into an altered state of mind.
You have a child who's motivated, and I think that the motivation is connected to the high ability. If you have high ability to learn, things come easily to you, you get a kind of a flow out of it. Flow is a state which all of us get into at certain times, where we're intensely occupied with some activity and we lose all sense of time.
Gifted musicians get tremendous joy from playing. The more they play, the better they get, so they enjoy it even more. It's a virtuous cycle of accelerated learning. Many parents may wish their child had a rage to master, but raising a gifted child is very hard work.
Do you still remember how to dissect an angle?
Especially for a single mother.
I need to show you.
Chloe has been teaching Mark at home since he was 6.
My sleep is very deprived. It's an average 4 to 6 hours of sleep every day. I wake up at least 2 hours before he does every morning just to prepare and to answer all his questions. He's a very inquisitive child, always asking lots of questions, stupid or not.
So the formula would just be 180 minus 80 divided by 2.
Yeah. Mark's studying the maths curriculum for 14-year-olds, way ahead of his peers.
Two sides are congruent. The opposing angles will be congruent too.
Okay. The biggest problem is he is at a different cognitive level compared to other kids his own age. He got very frustrated talking to other kids at his own age about history, about composers. They had no idea what he was talking about.
That's why I like homeschooling.
And I had to realize that a normal school setting is not something for my son.
Insatiable intellectual appetite comes at a price.
These children have a lot of trouble in school because they're so different from other kids. Another problem is friends. They're often socially isolated because they're so different from other kids they can't find kids to be friends with.
Gifted children are in danger of being labelled as freaks.
What is a normal life? I don't know. I guess he's different from other normal kids is that he doesn't watch that much TV and no video games. He spends more time on reading, libraries, playing outside in a park, stuff like that. That is what's abnormal about him, I guess.
Happily, despite his very grown-up persona, Mark has no shortage of friends of his own age.
I like him as a friend and a piano player because I like him, but the pianist talk. It's not a pianist. Oh, pianist. For example, like, if I'm just sitting on the couch minding my own business, like this, here he comes running in the door and he tackles me.
You look at Mark and you think this is exactly right for him. He's a wonderful boy. He's not awkward. He's not withdrawn. He's very sociable. He's brilliant and he knows it, but he doesn't, that he's not defined by it. He's also a boy. He just would like to squeeze every other minute out of the day and put it into the piano. Happy octave to you.
Today Mark celebrates a momentous occasion, bigger than a birthday. He's 8 years and 34 days old today. His fingers are finally long enough to span 8 keys on the piano.
Bravo. He's crossed this big milestone of playing an octave, which for an adult is a trivial task. It's easy. I mean, I can play a 10th all the time and an 11th if you break something. And, you know, but for Mark, that's been a goal for a long, long time. And you start to realize there's lots of piano music that depends on the ability to play an octave that he hasn't been able to touch yet.
Now the world of grown-up music beckons. But as Mark gets older, he'll have to meet quite different expectations.
Everybody claps and thinks it's wonderful if a 6-year-old plays the piano beautifully. By the time that 6-year-old is 18, nobody cares anymore if he plays technically beautifully. They only are going to be interested in that teenager if he plays in a new way, if he plays in a really creative way. And so you have to go from being a prodigy to being a creator. Mozart made that transition. He went from being a child prodigy to being a creative genius, and that's rare. That's why I'm actually very concerned about making children famous. because they want that fame to continue. Any child would want that fame to continue. And it's unlikely to.
For every prodigy that succeeds, there are many others that crash and burn. Puberty is a big hurdle for gifted kids, and it's not just hormones that cause trouble. At puberty, the brain has another go at cutting back connections. It's use it or lose it all over again. And the part that matures last is a brain area a teenager really needs, the prefrontal cortex, seat of judgment and self-control. This area isn't normally finished until the age of 20. With biology and psychology conspiring against him, what are Mark's chances of ever becoming a great musician? Today is a big day for Mark. He's going to meet his hero. Lang Lang is one of the biggest stars in classical music today. He started playing the piano in China when he was 3 years old and worked his way up to the top of the classical music game. Now he fills concert halls all over the world, 150 days a year. Lang Lang is the man Mark wants to be when he grows up.
Every time I practice, I think of him practicing very hard, which makes me practice very hard too. I would love to go to Carnegie Hall and perform there. I love to perform with many great orchestras, just like Lang Lang.
Mark has been invited backstage for an audience with Lang Lang. They've met several times before, and Mark almost dares to call Lang Lang a friend.
Same range. Wow, this is so high.
Today is special because Mark has spent months practicing a duet, and now he wants to play it with his idol.
Can you pedal here because of the octaves? Because
Sure.
I'll have to jump.
Lang Lang is happy to indulge Mark's enthusiasm because he knows exactly what it's like to be in his shoes. Lang Lang knows the pitfalls of puberty only too well.
Once you are a child prodigy, when you're growing up, everybody is watching you. And most of people like to see you're doing great, but some people also like to see that you're not so good. When I was 15, I started a new direction of playing. I like to play the hardest piece. I like to show people, how good I am. I had this, what you call the backlash. After getting all the great reviews, then I start getting really horrible reviews. It's like a nightmare. And then you need to think very carefully and to find yourself back.
Lang Lang is determined to support Mark in any way he can. Today, he has something very special to tell him.
I'd like to invite Mark to play Carnegie Hall with me in 2009, and also probably with the music variety. Hope to, yeah. So after 2 years practicing, I think he's ready for it. That would be pretty cool. 10 years old, debut at Carnegie. Not bad.
This is a big promise. The stakes are now higher than ever, and so is the pressure.
I hope that Carnegie Hall 2009 thing is not a joke. Also, I hope he's serious about it.
Tonight it's not Carnegie Hall. It's a local theatre 10 miles away from Mark's home.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are at Places.
Mark's journey so far has been an amazing ride. He's shown skill, intelligence, and motivation worthy of a grown-up.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight, we're sharing with you the imagination, dreams, and the journey to success through the eyes of a child. Let's meet Mark Yu.
But the most amazing thing about him is something only a child can give us.
Part of what tickles us inherently about a prodigy like this is what it's like when adult abilities are incarnate in a child. The possibilities are extraordinary for a child with a child's imagination and a child's heart. They inhabit a world that's much more about imagination and play and fantasy. I think that's what's exciting and what's got us all on the edge of our seats about Mark. If Mozart could see this, he'd probably be pretty pleased.